Hey, this is Shaun with the Atlanta Tennis Podcast, powered by Go Tennis. Check out our calendar of Metro Atlanta tennis events at letsgotennis.com. And if you're a fan of Bull Shark Sports, go to shop.letsgotennis.com. Get yourself a hoodie or a hat. Also, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your story on the podcast. So if you've got a story to share, go to letsgotennis.com/my story, and you might have your story featured on the Atlanta Tennis Podcast. Today, this is Youth Sports Talk with Coach Ben Hestley. Today's talk is about outcome-based cues instead of income-based cues. We'll explain it. Don't worry. Ben, you ready to talk some youth sports?
We'll dive in.
All right. So today's conversation focuses on what we're calling the cues we give the kids as a coach. Outcome-based is thinking about the result or maybe the target. And internal-based is thinking about the production of the shot or the swing or whatever you're doing, or maybe the technique is a way to put it. So Ben, where do you want to start? Do you want to define the two better than I just did, or did I do okay?
Yeah, no, you did pretty good. Pretty good there. I think, basically it's, we're talking today about giving the kids an outcome goal to achieve while they're performing a skill in the sport versus some sort of like mechanical cue about how their body is moving in order to achieve that, right? And so like it's two quick examples, let's use baseball and tennis. Baseball, elbow up is probably, you're in the batter's box, coach is yelling at you, get your elbow up. And that's kind of the most like a classic example of an internal cue for a batter. Tennis, talking about ground strokes, we've all heard racket back, get your racket back. That would be an example of an internal cue for a player. And we're just going to talk today about why that may not be the best cue and what might be a better focus on the player focusing on what they're supposed to be doing with the ball versus necessarily how they're doing it.
And at some level, we're going to need both. So we're not necessarily saying this isn't a change your coaching tactic point of view of saying,
yeah, totally.
No longer teach technique.
Yeah, so let's maybe back up a little bit. Like, this is not to say like you're going to have a kid standing in the batter's box with his feet facing towards the pitcher. Same in tennis. You're not going to have their body turned facing the net.
Just do whatever you want.
Like going, yeah, just whatever you want, right? It's not, it's not this roll the balls out and play kind of thing. I mean, there is some coaching that has to be done. You do have to set the player up in the right way, right? And so specifically saying both of these sports, hitting a baseball and hitting a ground stroke in tennis, you're going to stand sideways in baseball, sideways to the pitcher or sideways to the plate. In tennis, you're going to stand sideways to the net, obviously, so the ball is to the side of you when you're swinging. So yes, there are some like fundamental things that have to be in place, but this is like more a conversation about what we can give the kids as tools to focus on so they're producing rather than kind of doming them up so much with all this mechanical stuff. It's really just going to slow them down. It's going to break down the sequence of the swing and just going to be more difficult for them to process.
So I had two images come to mind. One is a guy named Eric Davis, and another guy is named Daniil Medvedev. So when I was a kid watching baseball, Eric Davis had his elbows in, and it was just the strangest thing. I think that's the same guy. I think I got it right. And he had his elbows right here next to his sides. And then by the time the pitch would come, he ended up getting to the spot. But his setup was so different in that you wouldn't necessarily teach that. Sometimes that just becomes the way a guy does it. And in the tennis, in the same way, you look at Medvedev and you're not going to teach what that guy does because he just does literally whatever it takes to get the ball. There's like a really, really good alto player that can just get the ball wherever it needs to go.
Yeah.
I think there was, who was it? Was it Radvanska? I think was one of the girls on tour that just didn't have the technique wasn't beautiful. We'll just put it that way. Is that a little bit of what we're talking about? Is yes, you know how to do it right, but sometimes let's focus on just hitting that target and see what happens.
Yeah, totally. And imagine if Daniil Medvedev had a coach who was so boxed in on the way it is supposed to look and not let the player have some freedom to use his body in the way that works best for him to generate the outcome that we're looking for. Because at the end of the day, we're looking for the outcome, right? Tennis, we're looking for you to hit some hard hit top spin away from your opponent that puts pressure on them. In baseball, we're looking for guys that can hit the ball hard to the outfield, preferably away from the outfielders. And so if you can do that, then why don't we worry so much about the way it quote is supposed to look? And I think that's the big deal is sometimes we have in our mind how it's supposed to look. And when someone's outside of that, we completely freak out and we go into all these internal cues, mechanical cues that may not necessarily be the best for that particular child.
And sometimes that's a coach fit with a player too, because I think of Medvedev's coach, and I'm pretty sure that's why he hired that homeless looking French guy, is because it's like that guy's going to kind of let him get away without yelling at him. Like,
Yeah.
I think Medvedev gives him the business enough. That guy's just going to walk away. But you've got to be able to match the coach with the player. If you've got a real technically minded kid, then you can stick with the technique, but you also need to break them out of it a little bit. But if you're just a technically minded coach, you may not have that idea to say, you know what happens if you just try to hit it over there? Well, how am I going to do that? I don't know. You just try it and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think about uh, my story that I remember about coaching baseball. I was coaching a 9U baseball team, and we're playing a team, and I forget where they're from. They're like south of Atlanta somewhere, and this coach on third base, their coach who's coaching third base, is talking to the batters, and these kids are 9 years old, right? They're good players, but they're still young. And he says to them, he's just screaming not screaming, but he's talking to them from the third base, from third base. He's going, "All right, Billy, come on, you can do this. Hit it in the gap, Billy. Hit it in the gap. Hit it out there in the gap." And I'm like, hit it in the gap. In the gap, for those who don't know, is between center field and right field, or between the left fielder and the center fielder. So it's in the gap between the outfielders, and that is typically where you want to hit the baseball because it gives you most chance to get a base hit. And typically, if you hit it between those two positions, you're talking doubles, triples, things like that. So that is a great place to aim. But I'm like, hit it in the gap, Billy. Like Billy can barely make contact. Right? I mean, forget trying to hit the ball between the right fielder and the center fielder. We're just lucky if this kid gets the ball back to the pitcher. But I made fun of him in my head, not to him, but in my head, I'm like, this guy's nuts.
Mm-hmm.
And then like a few days later, I'm like, maybe he's not so nuts. Like maybe he's pretty spot on, because what he did is he gave his kids what I refer to as a North Star, right? Yeah, Billy can't
Something else
hit
to think about.
ball. Huh?
Something else to think about as opposed
Yeah,
to your elbow.
he's not going. I mean, it was a lot better feedback than the coaches would go, "All right, get your foot down early and stride, load your back hip, get your hands up, get your hands down, get your hands back, get your elbow up." Like, oh God, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing here,
Right.
And so
Firing
it
the
was
third base coach, evidently.
yeah, and that was an example of outcome-based coaching, right? And even if the kid didn't do it, it doesn't matter. At least he has this North Star goal of, okay, I'm trying to hit the ball to the outfield in between the outfielders, in the gap. That's where I'm aiming for. If I roll over and hit the grounder to shortstop, that's okay. But at least I had a goal in mind of what I'm trying to do. And that guy actually helped me a lot, just rethink when I'm coaching a player, like what am I giving them to help them get what really matters? And that's the outcome that we're looking for.
And I appreciate you as a coach in that way, because I think back to a lot of the times I've rolled my eyes at somebody else and then a few years later remembered that moment and thought, well, maybe it wasn't so
Yeah.
ridiculous. To be able to realize maybe at the time I didn't understand something, or just my limited point of view or my limited experience didn't allow me to understand what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so much to it. So now when I work with kids, I try to do just that. I try
Like you said, you can't just do that. Meaning it's not just you take a beginner kid, and we had two kids in one of our programs as an example yesterday, two new brothers. Yeah, they said they played tennis before. You can clearly tell they haven't, meaning they might have gone out and whacked the ball back and forth, but zero formal training. But for me to just say, you know what, you're going to hit some serves, go stand on this dot, you're going to aim in that box into that box with the dot, go. And I really didn't say, okay, now I need the elbow. Like, Eventually
Yeah.
I got to that, but I actually started with the overall target, the overall goal, get the ball to that spot, however you do it. It also allows us as a coach to view, as coaches, to view what is this kid capable of? What are his thoughts when he says, all right, I'm going to get the ball over there. All right, ding. Does he just figure out how to do it, or does he try to do something he saw on TV, right? So to be able to give him that in the beginning and then back it up and say, okay, well, try this, add this little piece. Maybe we do it backwards a little bit and say, here's your overall goal, and then I'll offer you some ideas as to how to make it happen.
Yeah, totally. I get it. Another example, I was working with a kid just yesterday on hitting a top spin forehand. He's a pretty good player. He can rally really well, and but he kind of just and he's 12, so he's can play some green ball. He's really beginner, but he from the full court he can rally, but he pretty much just bumps the ball around, right? And so I was teaching him how to, it was a private lesson, and I was teaching him how to hit top spin. And really, I just gave him the feedback. I said, okay, I just want you to try. We talked about what top spin is, make sure we understand what that is. And it's just making the ball spin forward. And what are some of the benefits of it? And okay, you can make your swing a little bigger, and i.e. in his terms, I can add more power. That's the term the kids use. I can hit with more power and it still goes in. That's usually what the kids will say, which is true. Um, and then we talk about a few things it does to your opponent, like bounces up for them or kicks away from them or makes it more difficult for them to hit or whatever. But then I told him basically what I just said. I said, I'm going to feed you some balls and I want you to just make the ball spin forward. And then the next piece was as he made a mistake, he made it spin forward, but the first like probably 8 or 10 just kind of just they went spinning forward off the racket and basically went nowhere. They went straight down because he's almost like doing like combing over the top of
Over
the
the
ball,
top.
right? But he's making it spin forward.
There you
You
go.
know? I'm like, okay, now you have to make it spin forward, but you have to get it over the net because
Mm-hmm.
that's in a real match. That's what we have to do. And so then he starts, of course, brushing up more, maybe bringing the racket forward as he goes up, because first he's just brushing up like this. And again, getting spin, it's going upward, but it's just coming straight back down.
Yeah.
All right. So now you got to go a little forward as you go up, and then he actually was funny too, is he then naturally started figuring out how he had to loop his racket. And so now he gets this loop without me even saying anything, because somehow in his brain, he figured if I do like a little C shape, that's not the term he used, but it helps me generate enough racket speed to get the spin and to get the ball to go over and in the court. And all this was like self-organization. He's just,
Mm.
like you said, I'm mentioning things here and there that you may want to try, asking questions, like, well, why do you think it's spinning forward, but it's not going anywhere? He's like, well, maybe I should lift my racket up more. Okay, let's try that for a few. Okay, oh, now you're getting it up in the air, but it's still just coming straight back down. So how do we get it to go up but go forward as well, still spinning forward? And I think sometimes too, it takes a lot of trial. That's a long process as a coach, and asking a bunch of questions and getting feedback from your player takes a lot of effort, a heck of a lot more effort than just telling them what to do.
I was going to interrupt if you don't mind, because I just titled that Socratic coaching.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's one of those things you have to say, okay, well, I'm going to ask a lot of questions. What do you think? How would you fix this? Which you can do a lot more in a private lesson for sure, but
yeah,
also in the group to be able to ask that. And if they hesitate, jump in and help and say, okay, we'll try this. Maybe we try that. Because you could just sit there and ask questions for a while and have a kid stare at you blankly and get nowhere. Or the kid's going to give you an answer that isn't really helpful. But it's a scenario where we fit in a lot of that to let the kids see, if, what did you call it, self-organizing? Is that right?
yeah. And let them self organize and figure out the best way for them to perform best way for them to execute whatever the goal is. In this kid's case, it was hitting a topspin forehand.
Yeah, my one experience was one season playing church league softball with my father, and I was about 12. And they got me on the team. They're like, wait a minute, we're supposed to be an adult league. We need one more. Okay, great. My 12-year-old son can play. And my father says, he looks at me, and this is why I still laugh at softball as a quote unquote sport. And for males, like females, that's a different thing. That ball's going fast. But for males, he's like, he's going to lob the ball in. Like, you're a tennis kid. You can get this, right? All I want you to do is hit it over the second baseman's head and run to first base. And I went, oh, yeah, sure, I can do that. And I walked up and hit it over the second baseman's head and ran to first base. But all the other guys popped out and got it. I'm like, Dad, why are all these guys morons? Like, what's wrong with these people? Why don't they just do the same thing? He said, because they got this ego that says they have to try to hit it over the fence. or there's no point in being here. I'm like, but isn't the point to win and get more points than the other team? Like, isn't this the way to do it? But where I'm going with this is eventually I actually kind of got good at getting it over the second baseman's head because I figured out, all right, once knock it over there, then swing a little bit more. And then I actually just self-organized, I guess. I didn't know what to call it at the time, into getting pretty good at that. And then everybody moved over and said, well, this, Jason's kid just hits it over the second baseman's head. So they all went to cover it. And I'm like, well, how hard is it to just hit it over there where they aren't anymore? And so I went doink and hit it over the other way. But it wasn't like my elbow up didn't matter, Ben. It was just go hit it to the spot and see what happens.
Yeah. No, yeah. Well, slow pitch softball, that's a little bit easier to do than baseball.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
still,
not the same thing.
baseball is still, I mean, you have Freddie Freeman's the one that comes to my mind. I mean, who talks a lot about directional hitting.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I'm trying to hit the ball. I mean, I'm trying to trying to hit the ball to left center field. He's a lefty. He's trying to, hit the ball to the opposite field. And, he's a guy that can hit the ball, what we call foul pole to foul pole. I mean, he can hit left center gap. He can hit the right center gap. He can hit it straight over and burn the center fielder. He's hit home runs over every inch of the fence possible. But he really talks about trying to do that. And you're like, how can this guy try to, like, I mean, if a 97-mile-an-hour fastball is coming in on you, you should just be trying to make contact.
Well, that's for us mere mortals.
Right. But if you take what's actually funny is, and I work and dial it all the way back down to kids, if you're up there with a 97-mile-an-hour fastball and you're trying to just make contact, you actually will slow your body down to where it makes it more difficult to make contact with a 97-mile-an-hour fastball. If you have a goal in mind like Freddie and go, I'm going to bang this ball to the left center gap, he may not do it. Like I said, he might hit a ground ball to third baseman on accident. He might swing and miss completely, but he's actually got a better chance of executing that if he has a specific kind of North Star goal in mind, rather than worrying about a mechanical cue. And even what I just said, that's when you'll hear like, just make contact. Well, no shit, dude. Like, we're all just trying to make contact, I mean, who swings and misses on purpose, right? But if you have that big time goal in mind, then the kid will self-organize. Not to say they're going to be able to do it, nor do it consistently, because it's hard. These are hard skills.
Yep.
But they will definitely work themselves in a position to be able to execute something close to that.
And then we can add some of those internal cues to help them hit that goal. That makes a lot of sense. So Ben, did we answer the question? We're talking about outcome-based versus internal. There's no need for one versus the other. This is in combination as helping kids figure things out.
Yeah, I think the last thing to sort of put a bow on this would be, we're not saying internal cues are bad, and we're not saying just do outward goals or external cues. What we are saying, though, is that there's a time and place for them, right? I would not tell you to get your elbow up as you walked up to the batter's box in an actual baseball game, right? I would not be screaming. Well, we can't coach in tennis, but if we could, I wouldn't be screaming at you. Well, we can coach between sets and UTRs now, but I wouldn't coach you in a real match to say, oh, Shaun, make sure you get your racket back. There would be something else to that. But the last thing I'll say is, internal cues you can use, but if they understand the external outcome. So get the outward outcome first. We're trying to hit the ball to the outfield. In tennis, we're trying to hit top spin. We're trying to make the ball spin forward. Okay. We know what the goal is of what we're trying to do with the ball. Now that we've got that goal of what we're trying to do with the ball, yeah, I could slide in some internal cues of like, hey, if you just did this a little bit more with your back leg, or you did this a little bit more with your elbow or your bat, you move your bat angle a little bit more, or whatever the case may be, then you're pretty much on the right track. But definitely have those outward goals so it's clear to the kid what they're trying to do. They're not just trying to look good. They're actually want to be able to perform the skill in an actual game or match situation.
There we go. Ben, this has been Youth Talk Sports Talk about
Youth Sports Talk.
What do we call this? What is
Youth
it?
Sports Talk.
Youth Sports Talk. Thank you.
We talk youth sports.
We talk youth sports. We talk about the sports of the youth. I appreciate it, Ben. As always, this has been Youth Sports Talk with Coach Ben Hestley. and we will see you again next week. Thank you,
All
sir.
right. Have a great week, everybody.